The terracotta pot taps softly against the bench. You turn the old pot in your hands, ease the root ball loose, and stop for a second when you see how tightly everything has been holding itself together inside. It is easy to tell yourself this is only plant care, or that you simply like having something small and useful to do with your hands. But for many older adults, the relief comes from somewhere deeper than that. Sometimes what calms you is not the plant alone. It is the sight of something cramped being given room again, something living being returned to a shape it can actually grow inside. And when that shift in your mood happens this fast, the repotting is probably doing more than helping a plant. And then something more precise begins to show itself. At the patio table, the plant leans slightly in its too small pot, while your fingers loosen one tight circle of roots and brush away the tired soil clinging to the bottom. What feels good in that moment is not only the care, it is the clarity. The problem is visible. Your hands can feel it. The solution has edges. For many older adults, that kind of relief lands hard because so much of later life is emotionally real but hard to touch directly. A cramped root ball, a pot that no longer fits, a plant that needs more room. These are pressures the body can understand without explanation. And when something inside you also feels tight, crowded, or slightly off, that small act of making room can settle more than the plant. The part that looks simple now often has a much older history behind it. Many people who feel this kind of relief have spent years being the one who noticed when something was too full, too strained, slightly off, or no longer working the way it should. You can see that same instinct in a side yard moment, one hand rewinding the hose and pausing to guide the extra length into place instead of leaving it twisted on the concrete. That is not random. It comes from a life of adjusting, maintaining, making room, and keeping things from tipping too far into disorder. Over time, that builds a quiet strength. It also creates a hidden cost. A person like this gets very good at sensing when something needs a better fit, but can start feeling less at ease when life offers strain with no clear shape, no edges, and no obvious way to set it right. What makes this pattern easy to underestimate is that it comes with real competence. At the potting table, you lower the plant into fresh soil, turn the new terracotta pot a fraction, and adjust it until the space around the roots feels even on all sides. That kind of movement looks small, but it reflects a deeper skill. Many older adults who feel better after repotting are not simply being particular. They have learned how to notice pressure early, how to make a gentle correction before strain turns into damage, and how to create steadiness without force. There is strength in that. There is also a quiet vulnerability beside it. The same person who knows how to restore fit in the outer world may start relying on that kind of visible correction more than they realize. And that is where the habit begins carrying more than care. The more difficult layer usually appears when the discomfort has no clear container. In one corner of the yard, a few pots sit slightly out of line, and you stand there longer than the adjustment should require before moving each one just a little. From the outside, that can look like fussing, but often it is something more tender than that. When relief becomes closely tied to restoring order, fit, or breathing room, it gets harder to sit with feelings that cannot be repotted so neatly. A person may notice tension in the day, in the house, or in themselves, and reach first for something that can be straightened, shifted, loosened, or put back into proportion. That is part of the strength. It is also part of the cost. The outer correction brings real relief, but it can quietly become a way of circling around what still feels unsettled inside. And this is where other people often get the story wrong. On the garden path, the old pot sits off to one side, the new one waits on the other, and your hand smooths the last ring of soil around the base until everything finally looks settled. To somebody else, that may seem overly careful, maybe even like one more small thing you have to fuss over. But what is happening inside feels very different. For many older adults, the relief is not about making things prettier. It is about feeling one living thing move from strain into fit, from crowding into room, from slight pressure into steadiness. They see a gardening task. What is actually happening is a small, believable experience of correction that the body trusts right away. And when a habit gives that much real relief, it deserves a deeper reading than most people give it. The deeper truth is that repotting can touch something more private than order. At the bench in the morning light, you lift the plant to eye level and see the roots pressed tight against the shape that used to be enough. That can land harder than people expect. For many older adults, later life is not only about loss or slowing down. It is also about outgrowing an older fit while still living inside it. A role changes. A routine thins out. A version of the self that once made perfect sense no longer holds the same way. That is why repotting can feel so unexpectedly relieving. The plant is not being rescued because it failed. It simply needs a different amount of room for the stage it has reached. And sometimes, that is the part of the story the hands understand before the mind does. But it is worth admitting that the urge to repot, rearrange, or make room is not always only about the plant. That does not make the habit weak, dramatic, or less healthy. It often means repotting has become a quiet way of restoring fit when inner life feels harder to settle directly. And when your hands are doing that much emotional translation, the new pot is carrying more than soil. By this point, the emotional translation is easier to name. They see you changing a pot, brushing loose soil from the rim, and stepping back to check whether the plant sits straighter in its new space. What is actually happening inside is more personal than that. On the patio edge, your gloves rest beside the fresh terracotta pot, and the relief comes not only from how the plant looks, but from what the moment proves. Something that felt cramped has been given room without being broken first. Repotting feels good because sometimes relief is the feeling of finally giving life more room. And for many older adults, being understood there matters deeply, because the task is not just about the plant. It is about recognizing how much quiet strain can soften when something is finally allowed to fit. So the opening image means something different by the end. The new terracotta pot on the bench, the loosened soil around it, and the small turn of your hand to angle the plant toward better light are no longer just signs of good plant care. They have become a picture of something deeper and more human. For many older adults, feeling better after repotting is not really about enjoying a tidy gardening task. It is about the quiet recognition that not everything strained has to be forced to endure the old shape. Sometimes life does not need to be repaired so much as reset into a better fit. And that is why the new pot can hold more than roots. It can hold the feeling that growth is still possible without becoming a rupture. For many older adults, the relief in a moment like this is not a flaw, and it is not something small. It can be a signal that inner life has been asking for more room than words were ready to give it. The hands understand first. The plant becomes the visible version of a quieter truth. Something has been tight for too long. Something has outgrown its old shape. And when repotting brings real peace, that peace may be coming from more than care. It may be coming from the deep human need to keep growing without having to break in order to do it.